Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network, everybody. This is Jesse Weber. We are now in a mid-morning break in the Garri King, Michael Smith, and Lacquan Barrow case out of Florida. And I want to dissect everything that's happened today and what's been happening in the last few days. And to help me talk a little bit more about this, I'm joined by our second prosecutor of the day, Kendall Cofffi. Kendall, great to see you.
Hey, thanks for including me today.
Kendall, let's talk a little bit about what's been going on today. So we see the prosecution is making out a pretty strong case, I would say, against Mr. Barrow. Maybe Mr. Smith, but not really Mr. King. Do you see the same kind of thing?
Very, very much so. It was a pretty good morning for Mr. King, just in the sense that several times the jury now really has heard that defendant King, attempted to be a peacemaker. When you couple that with the fact that the other testimony up to now against King has not exactly been overwhelming, things are looking okay for him right now. Obviously, you pointed out, very, very, very different situation. Here we had a very, very clear eyewitness identification that Barrow had a gun and was shooting.
Yeah, we have 7 witnesses who've testified so far that they saw Lacquan Barrow shooting into the crowd. 3 others saw him in the club or parking lot before the shooting, basically showing that he was trying to get a gun. We have 5 witnesses said that they saw Garri King at the nightclub, but only 1 has seen him with a firearm, and that was one of the victims in this case who originally said, I'm talking about Nate or Munch, Nathaniel Kendrick, he was the one who actually initially told police that Smith and King were not the shooters, but Barrow was. And now when he testified, he said that all 3 were the shooters. And we keep kind of seeing this difference between what was told to police and what they're testifying to now. People that were involved in the altercation seem to be pointing more towards these defendants than they initially told police. What do you make of that?
Well, it's something that's going to be very clear to the jury that they have to look somewhat skeptically to this extent that there's a single witness that the state is relying on, because most of the witnesses have some inconsistencies. So with respect to King, if the best the state has at this point is one witness who was apparently contradictory, and that may not get it done for the state. And of course, as we also know, this has been described as chaotic. It's hard for me to think that the jury is going to find beyond and to the reasonable doubt anything in this scenario that rests entirely on the strength of a single witness. And at the same time, as we know, this is not a case where the jury is getting to see the forensics that they get used to seeing on television and reading about in some cases. We don't have that kind of conclusive DNA or other evidence. So there's a lot of questions. But when the jury starts to add it up and when they put the pieces together, you got multiple witnesses that can, for example, put a gun in the hands of Barrow. And if you have multiple witnesses that can put a gun in the hand of Smith, that's something that could go a long way.
Now, Kendall, you're a prosecutor. Explain this to me for a little bit. I get the second-degree murder charge in connection with Benicia Robinson. She was just a girl at the club caught in crossfire. Why were they not charged with attempted first-degree murder in the sense of, especially towards the Kendricks? Because based upon the story that I keep hearing, and what our viewers are hearing, what the jury is hearing, is that Mr. Barrow and maybe Mr. Smith went back to the parking lot to retrieve guns because there was this altercation with the Kendricks, and they went back to shoot them. Why not go for that attempted first-degree murder charge?
Well, I think you had enough to charge first-degree murder, at least with respect to Barrow, because there were comments being attributed to his showing that somebody was going to get killed that fateful night. Very often, there's a strategic decision made to avoid overcharging simply because there's inconclusive evidence. They want to try them together. They weren't sure enough. But I can tell you there are prosecutors who would have charged this, at least with respect to Barrow, as a first-degree murder case.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how it plays out. And one of the other interesting highlights of this case is that, yes, they're all being tried together, but they're 2 separate juries. So Mr. King has his own separate jury. And I have to tell you, I wouldn't be surprised if you see him being acquitted and maybe Mr. Barrow and Mr. Smith being found guilty. Do you think that might be a possibility?
I think it's a real possibility. So far, we haven't seen the defense case. We haven't seen all the prosecution cases. Like the jurors themselves we kind of want to wait till the end till we crystallize significant impressions. But based on what we've seen so far, Barrow is in a pretty uphill position. As you pointed out at the beginning of our discussion, King looks like he could be heading toward an acquittal. And it's kind of a mixed situation with respect to Smith. So his case is too close to call right now. But as we know, under Florida's law, if it's an attempted murder, even if, for example, Smith is charged with something less than the murder itself, and convicted for something less than the murder itself, if the jury finds that he had a gun in his hand and that he discharged that gun, then he is facing a very severe minimum mandatory in terms of time in prison.
Yeah, it's interesting when the questions is not, have you seen my client with a gun, or not even that, just have you seen them shoot a gun, or even did they have a gun in their possession? Because I think that's a really interesting point for the jury to hear. And the point, from what I've heard so far, is that no one even really saw, except for one witness, no one's really even seen King holding a gun, let alone firing one. What's interesting also about this case is the fact that you have the victims who are testifying here. And we saw Nathaniel Kendrick, who's been intimately involved in what happened here. And the fact that he initially said Barrow, and now he's linking up King and Smith. How much is it, in your opinion, when this case is brought to the media attention and certain defendants are brought to trial, how much is it for the danger of a witness who starts maybe embellishing certain facts, knowing that the three defendants are on the stand now that they've been identified? How much do they start creating in their minds? And remember, this is 2 years ago. Maybe they start filling in those gaps with new information because now they're trying to already point the blame at the defendants.
I think it happens commonly, and especially when a case is in the media, especially when it's getting talked about throughout perhaps the neighborhood and in the community, especially when you've got friends who are talking about it, hearing about it too. So that's a significant risk, and I think the defense is going to argue very strongly the difference between the original police interviews, where presumably the memories, the impressions were the freshest and the least tainted by other information. They're going to argue very strongly about that, and that's going to plant some serious issues in the minds of jurors.
We keep talking about what the Barrow defense team is going to do here, and we heard in the beginning of the opening statements from Mr. Gorley, who's his attorney, that there's this other individual, Kira Scott. Mr. Scott was with Mr. Barrow during this time, and apparently is going to testify to the fact that he tried to keep Barrow away, that Barrow was the one who was, he was the one who, when the gunfire broke up, who was undercover, that he had nothing to do with this. But you keep hearing these witnesses who didn't see Mr. Scott, or they didn't see anybody matching Mr. Scott's description. Is that one witness going to be enough for the defense to convince jurors here?
I think the witness is going to be pretty badly outnumbered, but as you know, jurors can convict based on the strength of a single witness. They find the witness credible enough, and they can certainly find a reasonable doubt if that witness is effective. Meanwhile, looking at the I'll call him the bouncer today, meaning no disrespect to security personnel. He wasn't a perfect witness, but by and large, I think he got a couple things across pretty well. I think the jury, listening to him and watching, as you pointed out, sort of some of the matching or some of the corroborating testimony by the detective, is going to think that he was mostly being truthful, maybe a few glitches here and there, but he didn't testify in a way that I thought was overly scripted. There were things he didn't know, things he kind of wasn't completely sure about. One thing that I think he was very convincing on, and I didn't see the defense try to detract from this, is that security guards were not there firing guns. So I think to the extent that the defense, especially Barrow's counsel, might have tried to present a theory that maybe security guards were firing too, I think that kind of alternative hypothesis of innocence is pretty much erased at this point. So what it's going to come down to is a tragic murder. Some people shot up badly. I don't think a jury is going to want to say no one is guilty here. So if this case is aiming toward a conviction of second-degree murder, then I think Barrow's got a lot to be concerned about.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, one of the great things about here on the Long Crime Network, as we videotape this, as we live stream the trials, we get to see the defendants reacting to certain testimony. And I think one of the people in this case who's the most interesting to watch, it might be defendant Smith, Michael Smith. Now, he was wearing a bright red shirt today. He makes kind of certain smirks during certain testimony. I have to ask, he chose to wear a very bright colored shirt in the courtroom with a very loud tie. Now, what does that signal to you? Is that a strategic move? He really is standing out there. Is that a strategic move, you think, on the part of his defense counsel?
Well, I mean, I hope it was consistent with defense strategy, because it wouldn't be part of my plan to have the client dress in any way that's eye-catching. You sort of want people to look like they're as serious as possible, dress conservatively, and you tell clients that the jury is watching you a lot, your face gestures, your reactions. And you try to encourage clients to dress and look and conduct themselves in a way that assumes they are under a microscope every minute that jury is in the courtroom. So things like smirks, things like colorful clothes, not anything that's in criminal defense law 101, but I'm going to assume that they have a reason to want to get some attention to their client. Either that or their client is just going to wear what he's going to wear no matter what the defense lawyers tell him.
Yeah, each one of them is reacting a little bit differently to the testimony. Mr. Barrow looks very concerned, very serious when each one is testifying. Some might even have said, and they even said in our message boards, he looks guilty. Mr. King looks hopeful, I would say, and then I think Mr. Smith is just a little entertaining to watch right now. But when there really was interesting is when one witness testified yesterday, Ebony Humans. Now, she was good friends of D.D. Kendrick. I want to play some of her testimony from yesterday, and then Kendall, I'd like to get your thoughts if we have time before we go to the live feed. So now I do want to play the testimony of one of the key witnesses from yesterday, Ebony Humans, and you will be the decision maker about whether or not you believe that she is a credible witness. Take a look.
Spell it for the court reporter, please.
Ebony, E-B-O-N-Y, last name Yeomans, Y-O-U-M-A-N-S.
And Miss Yeomans, are you currently employed?
Yes, ma'am.
And where are you employed?
At Avante.
What is that?
It's a nursing and rehab.
Okay. How long have you been there?
A few months.
Okay. Do you live in Ocala, Marion County?
Yes, ma'am.
How long have you lived here in Marion County?
All my life.
Do you know a person by the name of Danielle Kendrick?
Yes, ma'am.
Describe your relationship with Danielle.
That's my best friend.
Okay. What do you call her? Does she have a nickname? Dee Dee? Okay. Do you know Nathaniel Kendrick?
Yes, ma'am.
And who is Nathaniel Kendrick to you?
That's my best friend's brother.
Okay. Did you previously have a dating relationship with him?
Yes, ma'am.
When?
A few years ago.
Okay. Do you know a person by the name of Maisha Barrow?
I have heard of her name, but don't know her personally.
Okay. Have you seen her around town before?
I have.
On multiple occasions?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know a person by the name of Lacquan Barrow, or Quan?
Don't know him personally.
Okay. Have you seen him before?
I have.
Do you see him in the courtroom today?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you please point to him and identify something that he's wearing?
White shirt, blue tie.
Let the record reflect the witness has identified Lacquan Barrow.
The record will so reflect.
Do you know somebody by the name of Garri King?
I've heard of him.
Okay. Have you seen him before?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you see him in the courtroom today?
Black shirt,
Okay. Black shirt. What kind of tie is he wearing?
black and white tie.
Regular tie?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Let the record reflect the witness has identified Garri King.
The record will so reflect.
Do you know somebody by the name of Michael Eugene Smith?
I've heard of him.
Have you seen him before?
Once.
Once? The night of the Cloud 9 shooting?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you see him in the courtroom today?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you describe something he's wearing?
Black shirt, teal tie.
Okay. Bow tie?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Let the record reflect the witnesses identified Michael Smith.
The record will.
Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. We do have a live feed right now in this case out of Florida. I want to show a side-by-side view of what we see right now. It appears to be a sidebar right now with the judge in this case. I'm here today joined by our second prosecutor of the day, Kendall Coffee. Kendall, I'm curious about the idea when you have three defense attorneys here. How do they try to work together when each one of their clients is saying they had nothing to do with it? And let's not forget, we know that it's possible 3 guns were used in this shooting. We hear witnesses saying that they heard gunshots from at least 2 guns, maybe 3. And we know that yesterday, or the first day, that it was identified that 3 separate weapons or 3 separate shell casings were found from 3 separate guns. So the idea that it was 3 different defendants and not these gentlemen, how are they working together for a united front?
Well, that's a great question, because defense lawyers, as part of the culture, part of the tradition, try to cooperate with co-defendants because, of course, you've got the vast resources of the state, in the case of a federal case, the United States government, and the defense lawyers know that they've got to try to cooperate as much as they can against the common adversary because of all of the advantages that the prosecution has. The problem is you get into trial, and depending upon the nature of the charges, sometimes you got to go your own way. And this is a classic example of this. If you're King, you definitely want to separate as much as you can from Barrow. And in fact, you kind of, if you're looking out for your client, you're sort of hoping that the jury decides that Barrow was the bad guy who's responsible for everything and King is the good guy. But as a matter of professionalism, as a matter of trying to keep a cooperative liaison at the same time, you got to battle like crazy for your own client. They try to avoid piling on. So, for example, King's lawyer got up there and wants to say, now you didn't see King with a gun or anything like that. They've got to create a distance. But what they don't say, they don't try to reinforce the prosecution's message usually to the detriment of a co-defendant. You didn't see King's lawyer or Smith's lawyer go on and on and on and say, it was Barrow, wasn't it? Yeah, and Barrow made the comments, right? And it was Barrow that you believe fired at least 2 shots, maybe more. So what they try to do is separate themselves without piling on the co-defendant to the extent that they can.
Yeah, Kendall, good analysis. We actually do have a live feed in the courtroom, so let's go to it now.
Ready? Okay. We ready for the jury?
Yes, sir. When Mr. Shaw is cross-examined, if I could just ask that prior to counsel discussing things he may have said on prior occasions, the proper predicate be laid for impeachment. So not just asking him what he said before.
If you object, I'll rule on your objection. Let's return the juries, please. All right, call your next witness.
State calls Terrell Shaw.
swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Mr. McCord.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir. How you doing?
Doing well. Can you introduce yourself to the jury and spell your name for the court reporter?
My name is Jarrell Shaw, Jerrell. Last name is Shaw, Shaw.
Mr. Shaw, in 2015, did you live in the Okala area?
Yes, sir.
When did you move to Okala?
I moved to Okala maybe 2013, 14.
Did you grow up somewhere else?
I grew up in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Why'd you come to Okala?
I came to Okala for a slower pace of life, slower pace of living, and it's more affordable up here also.
Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network, everybody. This is Jesse Weber. Unfortunately, we're not allowed to show this witness or provide audio for him. So as soon as that testimony is done, we will go back to the courtroom and hopefully we'll explain to you what you may have missed. Apologize for that, but that is just the rule that we have to go by today. But not a big deal because we do have a lot of testimony to talk about and a lot of analysis to dissect in this case. And joining me again is our prosecutor, our second prosecutor of the day, Kendall Coffee. Kendall, I want to just talk about, before we went into the break, a little bit about some of the aspects of this case that we might have missed. The prosecution right now is going to have, I think they might rest their case today. What else do they need to put forward that they might not have done so far, that you might not have seen so far?
Well, I mean, I think they put as many witnesses as they can. I don't know, and I think they'll get to this in closing, if they've explained some of the inconsistencies, because as we've seen, there were witnesses, including some significant elements of testimony, which changed from the time of the original police interview, where presumably the witness had the most recent recollection of things, was not anyone who had been tainted by watching media coverage, talking to friends, and things like that. And then you get to the time of trial, and there's some changes. In fact, there's some enhancements that are added to the testimony. Prosecution has taken some lumps in that area, and I think we'll hear that in closing they'll try to repair that. But that's a couple breaks in the fence that they've got. The other thing, and they tried to explain this as the best as they could, is there's, by modern standards of firearm homicide cases, not a lot of forensic backup for the prosecution's position. And I think that's something that the defense is also going to hammer on. Certainly the prosecution in the state's case attempted to explain that, but I think nowadays jury expectations are pretty high. I mean, I think a lot of jurors think if you've got half of a fragment of a hair, you can identify a person by name, who their parents are, what suit they were wearing. I mean, they're extravagant expectations, but sometimes the expectations are somewhat realistic. So that's another area that the prosecution is going to have to come back to, and the defense is certainly going to talk about in closing.
Yeah, this isn't CSI as much as sometimes we want it to be.
No.
We keep separating Mr. King from Barrow and Smith, and I think rightfully so, because the evidence that the jury has been able to see hasn't been so strong against Mr. King, so it will be interesting to see how the prosecution flavors that in their closing arguments. Mr. King actually requested a speedy trial. That's one of the reasons why we have two separate juries and the timing of it worked. Why do you think he requested a speedy trial?
Exactly because he knew that he had the strongest case, and he was the one that wanted to get in there, both in front of the judge and everyone else, and say, I'm innocent. I want to clear my name. And procedurally, sometimes you actually stay in a better position doing that, because speedy trial requests from people who think there's a weak prosecution case assume that let's go with what we've got. I think I've got a fair shot at an acquittal tomorrow. And then there's always the risk that if the other defendants eventually plead guilty, they may turn on them, and they may say, for example, if Barrow is convinced that he's got to make some kind of plea deal, he may turn on King. Sometimes you just want to get to trial and try to get your acquittal.
Yeah, it would have been interesting if all three were going out at each other. The defense team for Barrow was saying Smith did it, Smith was saying King did it, King was saying it would have been interesting to see that, but they didn't need to do that. I do want to play, because we didn't get a chance to fully show it, the testimony of Ebony Humans from yesterday. Again, Danielle Kendrick's really good friend was in the club that night, saw this whole altercation, and then the question becomes her credibility, which really was attacked properly by the defense attorneys. I want to play her testimony for you now.
Spell it for the court reporter, please.
Ebony, E-B-O-N-Y, last name Yeomans, Y-O-U-M-A-N-S.
And Ms. Yeomans, are you currently employed?
Yes, ma'am.
And where are you employed?
At Avante.
What is that?
It's a nursing and rehab.
Okay. How long have you been there?
A few months.
Okay. Do you live in Ocala, Marion County?
Yes, ma'am.
How long have you lived here in Marion County?
All my life.
Do you know a person by the name of Danielle Kendrick?
Yes, ma'am.
Describe your relationship with Danielle.
That's my best friend.
Okay. What do you call her? Does she have a nickname? Dee Dee? Okay. Do you know Nathaniel Kendrick?
Yes, ma'am.
And who is Nathaniel Kendrick to you?
That's my best friend's brother.
Okay. Did you previously have a dating relationship with him?
Yes, ma'am.
When?
A few years ago.
Okay. Do you know a person by the name of Maisha Barrow?
I have heard of her name, but don't know her personally.
Okay. Have you seen her around town before?
I have.
On multiple occasions?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know a person by the name of Lacquan Barrow, or Quan?
Don't know him personally.
Okay. Have you seen him before?
I have.
Do you see him in the courtroom today?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you please point to him and identify something that he's wearing?
White shirt, blue tie.
Let the record reflect the witnesses identified Lacquan Barrow.
The record will so reflect.
Do you know somebody by the name of Garri King?
I've heard of him.
Okay. Have you seen him before?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you see him in the courtroom today?
Black shirt,
Okay. Black shirt. What kind of tie is he wearing?
black and white tie.
Regular tie?
Yes, ma'am.
Let the record reflect the witnesses identified Garri King.
The record will so reflect.
Do you know somebody by the name of Michael Eugene Smith?
I've heard of him
Have you seen him before?
once.
Once? The night of the Cloud9 shooting?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you see him in the courtroom today?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you describe something he's wearing?
Black shirt, teal tie.
Okay. Bow tie?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Let the record reflect the witnesses identified Michael Smith.
The record will so reflect.
Did you go to Cloud9 Club on September 12th, going into the morning of September 13th of 2015?
Yes, ma'am.
Where were you before you went to the club?
To my mom's.
Who else was there with you?
A bunch of family, because my nieces had came down.
Okay. And eventually, some of you went to the club that night?
Yes, ma'am.
Who went with you?
Danielle and I believe one of my other nieces.
Okay, so 3 of you went together in one car?
I met Danielle in town.
Okay. Did you arrive together with Dee Dee?
Yes, ma'am.
Where did you park?
I can't quite remember.
Okay. Do you know approximately what time you got there?
It was after 11.
Okay. And were you able to get in the club when you got there?
Yes, ma'am.
How crowded was it when you arrived?
Not so crowded.
So you go inside and what do you do?
Just stand around.
Okay. Eventually, does a fight break out inside the club?
Yes, ma'am.
How close were you to this altercation?
Probably like where I'm sitting to where you're standing.
Okay. So, would you say 15, 20 feet?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you see who was involved in this fight?
Yes, ma'am.
Who?
The girl they called Maisha and Lacquan.
Okay. And who else?
It was a bunch of people around, so.
Okay. Who was Maisha fighting?
Yes, ma'am.
Who was she fighting?
Danielle.
And you said Quan became involved in it as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Did that get broken up?
Eventually,
How?
by security.
What happened with that group that was involved in the fight?
They put him outside.
Did you end up outside as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Describe to the jury what happened once the group and yourself was outside the club.
A security guard was out there, and I was pretty much like, can you just make them leave so we can go, to like suppress the situation so nothing further would happen. And it was just a bunch of commotion going on outside.
Did a fight start up outside the club as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Between who?
Danielle and Maisha.
Okay, so it started up again after they were outside.
Yes, ma'am.
Did Laquan become involved in that as well?
I can't quite remember.
Did you see Nate at any time inside the club?
Once.
When you saw him inside the club, what was going on?
Nothing, just passed him.
Okay. Did you see him outside the club?
Eventually.
Okay. At the point in time that we were just talking about when Maisha and Danielle started fighting again, he was not outside? Okay. What was Laquan doing when his sister and Danielle started fighting again outside the club?
He was trying to get closer to the fight.
Did he get close to the fight?
Not to get involved.
Did you hear him say anything at this point in time?
Yes, ma'am.
What did you hear him say?
He said he gonna wet a bitch.
What does that mean to you?
To me, that means he's gonna shoot somebody.
Okay. And when you say wet, you're saying W-E-T?
Yes,
Wet?
ma'am.
Okay. After he said that, what did he do?
He was just pacing back and forth in the parking lot.
Okay. Where was all this going on in relation to the front door of the club?
Like, right in the front.
Okay.
Like, as soon as you get out of the door.
Do you remember what Laquan was wearing that night?
Yes, ma'am.
What was he wearing?
He originally had on a black t-shirt with a dark color bottoms, but outside he had on a black tank top.
Same bottoms that you saw him in before?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you see Garri King there at the club that night?
I don't remember seeing him inside, but afterwards.
Okay. Where did you first remember seeing him?
As he came to the front door after the shooting.
Okay. So you didn't see him until after the shooting took place?
Yes, ma'am.
What about Michael Smith? Did you see him there that night?
Yes, ma'am.
Inside the club?
I can't recall seeing him inside.
And you saw him, where do you recall him being the first time you saw him that night?
Standing to the right side of the building.
Okay. And do you remember what he was wearing?
A white t-shirt and red basketball shorts. White tank top.
Does anybody try to break up the fight that's occurring between Maisha and Danielle outside the club at this point?
Yes, ma'am.
Who was trying to do that?
Myself along with some other people that was outside.
Were you successful in breaking the two females up?
Yes, ma'am.
And what happened after that?
We was just pretty much trying to get security to just clear the parking lot.
Were you trying to leave?
Yeah.
Were you trying to take Danielle with you?
Yes, ma'am.
Where was your cousin that you were there with? Was she out there as well?
I can't remember where she was at the time.
After the fight broke up outside, where were you in relation to the front door of the club?
To the edge of the building, towards the right.
Towards the Oyster Bar or the other side?
The other side.
Okay, the parking lot next to Cloud9?
Yes, ma'am.
On the side. Okay, so you're more towards the side of the building.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, what happens next?
Eugene and Quan is standing out in the parking lot, and then him and Danielle is exchanging words.
Who and who are exchanging words?
Quan and Danielle.
Okay. And what do you hear Quan say, if you can understand anything?
He kept saying he was going to catch him a body.
Did you see Nathaniel at this point?
Not at that time.
When do you see Nathaniel outside the club?
It was a few minutes had passed, and then that's when He came behind us.
So are you standing there with Danielle?
Yes, ma'am.
Facing the parking lot?
Yes, ma'am.
And where is Quan and Michael Eugene Smith?
Facing the building.
Okay. So you kind of facing each other?
Yes, ma'am.
Where are Laquan and Michael in relation to any cars or anything in the parking lot?
Standing like between the cars that was in the parking lot, more so towards the front of the vehicles.
Okay. And were they standing next to any particular car that you remember?
I can't remember that.
Okay. Was the parking lot packed at this point?
I mean, with cars, but the people were like everywhere.
Okay. I mean with cars, I'm sorry. Was it full with cars?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Was there also a vehicle parked kind of on the sidewalk in the front?
Yes, ma'am.
What kind of vehicle was that?
All I remember was a dark colored vehicle. I never knew what type of vehicle it was.
Did you see Laquan Barrow with a firearm that night?
Yes, ma'am.
When's the first time you saw him with a gun?
When he got it from Eugene after they passed it.
Okay. Where did they pass each other?
Like, not in a parking area, but in like the open spot before you actually get to the parking between the building, and they have parking spots. So before the parking spots start, they were right there.
So you saw Michael Eugene Smith hand Laquan Barrow a gun. What happens after that?
They were just standing out there, just walking back and forth.
Okay. Is this after you and Danielle and Laquan and Michael are facing each other and words are being exchanged?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So they're walking back and forth. What happens next?
And then eventually that's when Nathaniel came outside.
Okay.
What's up, nigga?
Nathaniel said that?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you tell who he was directing that to?
From my understanding, he was saying it to Laquan.
Okay. Did Laquan respond back to that?
I can't remember. He probably was just out there, just moving around.
Okay. Where was Nathaniel at this point in time when he came outside in relation to you and Dee Dee?
Well, standing more so beside me, and Danielle was back here
Okay. Kind of back
a little bit.
behind the two of you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And are Laquan and Michael still facing, directed their bodies towards the front of the club?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What happens next?
And then Nathaniel told him, if you're going to shoot, nigga, shoot.
Okay. Nathaniel says that to Laquan.
Yes, ma'am.
What happens?
And they were just arguing back and forth, and then eventually shots started.
Okay. Did you see who was shooting?
Yes, ma'am.
Who did you see shoot?
I first seen the one that Laquan had, then when Michael leveled off and started shooting.
Okay. So you saw both Laquan Barrow and Michael Eugene Smith shoot in which direction?
Towards the club way.
Okay. Who was standing there?
Like towards it, like beside the club.
Yeah.
It was other people that I can see behind me, and then me, Nathaniel, and then Danielle was that way.
So would you say that the three of you were closest to the two of them?
Yes, ma'am.
Once the two of them started shooting, what did you do?
We ducked and then ran in front of the building, inside of the door.
Okay. And what did you see about Nate at that point in time after the shooting started?
Well, seeing him run, then fall inside the door.
Okay. And where were you when you saw him fall?
We was in the door together.
Okay. You and Nathaniel were in the door together?
Yes, ma'am.
Where was Danielle?
She had fell. I thought she had just tripped.
Was that in the front of the club?
Yes, ma'am.
What happened after she fell in front of the club?
Then I turned to look at her, and another girl was pulling her inside of the door.
Okay. Where did you get to?
Like, in the door, like right in the door.
Did you go in the club?
Yes, ma'am.
What did you do once you got inside the club?
I was just sitting there, like, shocked.
Did you call 911?
I tried.
Were you successful?
Not the first time.
Eventually, were you?
Yes, ma'am.
Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network, everybody. This is Jesse Weber. So as I said earlier in the day, we cannot show the witness that is appearing right now that is testifying in the Lacquan Barrow, Michael Smith, and Garri King case, the one that's testifying right now due to safety concerns. But we can let you know what this witness is saying. So the witness has identified King and Smith in the courtroom, said that he saw them at the club that night. The witness says that Mr. Barrow was angry. He came out of the club making threats. The witness says that Barrow said, "Give me a stick," which is slang for an assault rifle. Now, the witness also says that Barrow had a shirt on, but had taken it off and it only had a tank top on. And now this is really where it's key. The witness that is testifying right now has said that he saw Lacquan Barrow, Michael Smith, and Garri King each firing a gun. So now we have at least one witness who's come on the stand and said that, this is now the second witness who's come on the stand and said that Mr. King has been a shooter in this crime. I want to talk a little bit about this with Kendall Coffee, our prosecutor for the second prosecutor with us for the day. Kendall, so as I said, the witness that's testifying right now has identified Mr. King as a shooter. What is a jury to make of this when you have multiple witnesses who are each giving differing accounts of what they saw and heard? Then again, it was a loud nightclub, but are we supposed to believe everybody? I mean, it really might be hard for them to dissect everything.
Well, we talk about reasonable doubt all the time. And if you've got multiple witnesses who didn't see King with a gun, you've got at least one witness, arguably with some bias, because it might have been a remote family member who says King was trying to be the peacemaker, then I think that the case gets a lot closer. But it could still end up as a reasonable doubt case, and that is indeed how it's going to be argued by the defense. Meanwhile, it's going to be fascinating to see what the prosecution does. Do they want to sometimes when they see that they think that they've really got strong evidence against certain of the defendants, they load up on what they think is the evidence that is the weakest against a particular defendant when they get to closing, because they don't want to let that third defendant slip away. But that's a big tactical decision, because you spend too much time talking about somebody like King because you think the evidence isn't quite so overwhelming. Maybe Smith gets acquitted, maybe King gets acquitted. So that when you've got disparity in evidence, which we seem to have so far, it makes the prosecution's closing strategy and ultimate trial strategy somewhat more complex.
See, the prosecution was able to establish in my mind that 3 guns were fired. Okay, I believe that. If I'm sitting on the jury, I believe that 3 guns were fired. It's going to be difficult for me to think that with more evidence now pointed towards Barrow, some evidence now pointing towards Smith, and now new evidence kind of pointing towards King, that it would be 3 entirely separate individuals who've not been identified by anybody so far, that they're the shooters. And I think at the end of the day, sometimes it is common sense. But how difficult is it prosecuting this case when the actual physical evidence doesn't tie to these 3 men? Or I looked at that cell phone footage. We're looking at footage from the security cameras. I mean, maybe more will come out. But that footage really didn't help my understanding of what happened. So when you really just have it based upon witness testimony and your experience, can it be enough?
It can be enough, but it makes it a much more difficult job, because in a perfect world, if you had the better forensics and the greater clarity in terms of firearm evidence, you could cut a couple of the witnesses loose. When you put on a lot of witnesses, of course, there's more cross-examination, there's more issues and holes that can be poked in the various accounts, and you would prefer a situation where you can rely heavily upon forensic testimony, and then maybe just a couple of your very best eyewitnesses, rather than put a whole batch of them, because inevitably from that collection of witnesses, questions are going to rise, questions which the defense may use in closing argument to try to create a reasonable doubt.
This case has been really interesting on multiple levels, some dramatics. I don't know if you had a chance to see earlier in the week, there was a witness who was this is the guy named Christopher Jones. He was incarcerated, and he was supposed to testify on behalf of the state, but chose not to. He chose not to, even in the face of a subpoena and an order from the judge. He was held in contempt of court. That was a 6-month jail sentence that's now on top of what he's already serving for different charges. So he chose not to testify when he had already initially told police that Lacquan Barrow was the shooter. What do you think about, what do you make of that?
Well, I make of it, he obviously didn't want to follow up on his testimony about Barrow. It's hard to know what goes on inside somebody's minds. I don't know if you remember the case, federal case some years ago, where the trainer for Barry Bonds went through a lot of efforts to make him testify against the baseball great. And that trainer never did testify, and he wound up spending a fair bit of time in federal prison. So it's a huge price to pay. As we can imagine, federal prison, county jail, a miserable place to be. But obviously, whether it's some kind of friendship, some kind of other worries or pressures, we can only speculate. It takes a powerful reason to keep somebody off the stand when they got to go to jail in order to think about why they're not testifying.
I know, 6 months in jail. I mean, this witness that we can't show right now, it's due to safety concerns. I'm sure, correct me if I'm wrong, there might be some dangers for people. I mean, we can't show a lot of the witnesses when they're testifying. We can play audio. There's a danger to some of these witnesses who take the stand. I mean, you have 3 defendants on the stand. There's probably pressure from the community. I mean, this is a reality. It's not a TV show. This is an actual thing to be concerned about, correct?
Yeah, and everybody who's in that courtroom has to go back to a community and perhaps encounter or face friends of the defendants, family of the defendants. So for most of the people who are testifying, this is a very tense and frightening time.
Let's show a little bit of what happened earlier in the week with Christopher Jones when he refused to take the stand, refused to testify, and even at the very beginning when he was asked, do you swear to tell the truth, he said, no ma'am. Very interesting, very dramatic. Let's play that short clip for you right now.
Nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Have a seat. Sir, can you tell me your name? Mr. Jones, do you understand that you're under subpoena to give testimony in this proceeding? You received a subpoena?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. That subpoena means that whatever you say here cannot be used against you to prosecute you for any sort of offense. Do you understand that? But it also means that you have to answer questions. And that if you were to refuse to answer questions after being given the subpoena, that you could be held in contempt of court.
That's fine.
And that you could be sentenced to jail.
That's fine.
Is that your intention?
Yes.
You're not going to answer anybody's questions?
Not one.
Just right in front is fine. Mr. Jones, raise your right hand, please, again. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Tell me your full name. So that's not true? Do you understand, sir, that you have been served with a subpoena requiring you to give testimony in this proceeding? Do you understand that I am now ordering you to testify in this proceeding? You don't understand that? Well, I'm telling you that you have to answer the questions of the attorneys. You're refusing. Do you understand that refusing to testify after being ordered to do so by a judge would subject you to a potential contempt citation? Okay. Well, it means I can sentence you to jail, and without a jury for up to 6 months. Do you understand that? Okay. I'm ordering you to testify. Will you testify? Can you show me any reason why I should not hold you in contempt of court? Right. But you can't demonstrate any reason for me not to hold you in contempt. court finds you to be in contempt of court, you'll be sentenced to 180 days in the Marion County Jail. You're going to serve that before you return to the Department of Corrections.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes I can't even make this stuff up. It's just too good to be true. Again, there was Christopher Jones refusing to testify in the Lacquan Barrow, Michael Smit, and Garri King case out of Florida, which we are covering here on the Law and Crime Network. Again, the witness that is currently on the stand, we're not allowed to show, I'm not allowed to play any of the audio, due to safety concerns. It's a big issue in this case about safety. That witness that you just saw, Christopher Jones, refused to testify and was sentenced to 6 months in jail for contempt. Why did he refuse to testify? I don't know. Was it safety? Was it a concern? Maybe. But I do want to tell you what this gentleman who is testifying right now, what he is testifying about. Again, as I mentioned earlier, he has positively identified Lacquan Barrow, Mr. Smith, and Garri King as each of them firing a gun. So each of them have been a shooter, according to this witness. He just testified that the Barrow and King went to a smoke gray F-150 truck or something like that after Barrow was asking for a stick, which is slang for an assault rifle. So again, we are updating you about what this witness is testifying, even though we cannot show you the video or audio. With us today is prosecutor Kendall Cofffi. Kendall, the video of Jones refusing to testify, have you seen anything like that?
I can't remember seeing anything like that. It's certainly been a very long time. People would usually rather get on the stand and say they don't remember than spend 6 months in jail, which they will always remember.
Right. It seemed strange if you could have just came over and said, I don't remember. Then again, he did give a police interview where he positively identified Mr. Barrow. So he would have been pressured on that and ultimately would probably had to concede about what he said. So I guess refusing to testify for whatever reason he did, whatever motivation he had, was probably the best decision for him. In the end, he doesn't care about spending those 6 months in jail on top of the already charges that he has. We've seen all sorts of kinds of witnesses in this case. I'm curious about victims. When victims take the stand, in your opinion, how much does a defense attorney, you have to be careful with that, correct? Because they're victims. They were shot in this case. But at the same time, when you have a victim like Nathaniel Kendrick, who is now pointing the finger at all three of these individuals as being the shooter when he originally didn't say that, what's that dance you have to play as a defense attorney, I guess, where you have to grill them on cross-examination, but also be respectful of the fact that they're a victim?
Well, you just described it. You've got to grill them and respect them at the same time. Usually with a victim, what you hope you can do is focus on things that they don't remember well, things that they weren't able to observe, reasons why they may not actually be so very, very sure about whatever incriminating things they're saying toward your client. That's the easiest way to cross-examine, by trying to minimize a witness who, as you say, is, as a victim, as somebody who was really hurt, is going to command tremendous sympathy. But sometimes you got to go after them. And nobody likes doing that. The tone's got to be respectful, but the questions, especially to the extent that you're trying to expose inconsistencies and maybe suggesting bias or even lack of credibility on the witness, you got to do it sometimes. The key thing is, I think, defense counsel try to be very, very selective. So if you got 6 or 7 victims that are going to testify, you don't try to batter every one of them. If there's somebody that you think could really, really sink your client, you kind of want to let that be the witness that you're more aggressive about, because otherwise, if you are attacking every single victim aggressively, the jury's going to see you as sort of re-victimizing somebody who simply didn't deserve to be shot or hurt. So the defense lawyers got to do what they got to do. They want to be respectful, but they want to make sure at the end of the day that they don't become a very antagonizing force in the minds of the jury.
So we expect the prosecution to rest their case possibly today. When they eventually do close their case and they do present a closing argument, how would you wrap it up nicely for the jury when you have these inconsistent statements, people providing different context, different statements than they made to police, than they are testifying now, not everyone remembers or says the same thing. You have these inconsistencies. How would you wrap it up nicely? Because you do have 3 defendants, and despite the fact that the evidence so far seems to be stronger against Mr. Barrow than it does, let alone Mr. King and Mr. Smith, you have 3 defendants. You're going after each of them. They're all charged with second-degree murder and attempted second-degree murder. Mr. King, let alone, has 4 counts. Smith and Barrow have 5. But how would you tie it up nicely so that the finger is pointed at each one of them, excuse me?
Well, I think we'll see them emphasize the fact that there were 3 guns blasting away, and only 3 defendants that can be credibly placed with hands on those guns. You got to acknowledge, of course, that there are inconsistencies because the scene was chaotic and human memory isn't perfect. But how many of the witnesses had a strong motive to actually lie, to actually make up stuff? So you hope that you can address, you don't spend all your time on it, some of the inconsistencies with acknowledgement and say victims and witnesses are human too. But just go back to the central theme. There really isn't a alternative hypothesis so far of a 4th person. We can't really identify that 4th person. There is no, to recall the movie Fugitive, a one-armed man that's appeared so far in this landscape. So 3 guns, 3 defendants, 3 guilty verdicts. That's going to be the focus of the prosecution.
Kendall, we sit back here, we're viewing from the outside in. We don't know all the facts. We don't know what's spoken between the attorneys and their clients. Are you surprised at all, even a little bit, that the fact that at least not one of them has gone with, maybe they all chose to say not guilty, that they had nothing to do with this? Are you surprised that you might not have even seen a self-defense kind of argument that perhaps, look, there was a fight. We know there was a fight. Everyone's testified that there was an altercation, there was a fight. Now, we know that a gun was brought to a fist fight. That is an aspect there. But are you surprised that we didn't even see the flavor of a self-defense argument?
I'm not completely surprised. The person who was actually killed was an innocent woman. No one's going to suggest that she presented a imminent threat of serious bodily injury or death to any of the defendants. What surprises me a little bit is none of the 3 have turned on each other, that we don't have, in effect, a plea deal and a cooperator. Because usually, when you're facing this much mandatory time, if for anybody who's convicted of even attempted murder who discharged a firearm, usually somebody doesn't want to roll the dice on that many years and makes a deal with the prosecution.
I'm just going to have to ask, do you think at least one of them is scared of doing that to the other, of testifying or at least making that deal? If you have 3 people who are in charge in this crime, one of them takes a deal, is there any fear there?
I don't like to speculate, especially about things like that, but for all the reasons that you don't have your cameras on the current witness testifying, I think that concern is in the back of minds of at least a few people here, and possibly one of the defendants.
Yeah. Let's show we keep talking about the surviving victims testifying. We saw the testimony of Danielle Kendrick, Dee Dee, as she keeps her nickname is, you keep hearing it throughout this trial. She was one of the people that got involved in this altercation with Mr. Barrow's sister, Maisha Barrow. So let's listen to her testimony from yesterday. And again, as soon as we have an update in this case, we'll talk to you about what the witness is testifying to. And as soon as we do have a live feed, we'll make sure to go back to it. But in the meantime, here's the testimony of Danielle Kendrick.
Person in at the table?
Ma'am?
Is he the second person in at the table in the white shirt?
Yes.
Okay. Let the record reflect the witness has identified Lacquan Barrow.
The record will so reflect.
Are you familiar with a person by the name of Garri King?
Just seen him on Facebook.
Okay. Have you seen him in person too?
Yes.
Okay. Do you see him in the courtroom today?
Yes, ma'am.
What is he wearing?
A black shirt.
And you further specify, like, what kind of tie is he wearing?
Black, white, and gray.
Okay. Is it a regular tie, a long tie?
Long tie.
Okay. Let the record reflect the witness has identified Garri King.
The record will so reflect.
Are you familiar with a person by the name of Michael Eugene Smith?
No, I think I seen him the same night of the club.
Okay. Was that the first time you would have seen him?
Yes.
Okay. Do you see him in the courtroom today?
Yes.
Can you describe what he's wearing?
Black shirt with a small tie.
Okay. Is that a bow tie?
Yes.
Let the record reflect the witness has identified Mr. Smith.
The record will reflect that identification.
Did you go to Cloud 9 the night of the shooting?
Yes, ma'am.
Who did you go with?
Ebony Yomis.
Anybody else with you?
No.
Okay. How did you get there?
Ebony's car.
Okay. Who drove?
Ebony.
Do you know approximately what time you guys arrived?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Do you remember where you parked?
No, ma'am.
Okay. When you got there, was it crowded or not so crowded yet?
Not so crowded.
Did you get inside?
Yes, ma'am.
What happened once you got inside the club?
We walked in and I don't really remember, like, walked in the club.
Okay. Once you walked inside, did you see other people that you knew?
Yes.
Who do you remember seeing when you first got there?
Ebony's niece.
Ebony's niece?
Yes.
Is that what you said? Okay. Eventually, did you see your brother,
No.
Nathaniel?
No, ma'am.
Did you see him ever inside the club?
No.
Okay.
No, I didn't see him inside the club.
Okay. Did you see Mr. Barrow inside the club?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you see Mr. King inside the club?
Ma'am.
Did you see Mr. Smith inside the club?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you see Maisha Barrow inside the
Yes,
club?
ma'am.
Eventually, did something happen between the two of you inside the club?
Yes.
What happened?
A fight.
Okay. How did that start?
She walked up to me and swung, and I swung.
Okay. Did either of you make contact with each other during the fight? Did you actually hit each other?
Yes.
Okay. Did something break that up?
Actually, no. Her brother, Quan, and I don't know, it was some other dudes, I guess, was hitting on me,
Okay.
should I say.
Okay. So other people joined the fight that started between you and Maisha?
Yes.
Okay. And one of those people was Laquan, her brother?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you get hit by any of these other people that joined in on the fight?
I don't know, I hit the ground.
Okay. How did that all end? Inside the club? Eventually, did the fighting stop? Did people stop hitting each other?
Yes, I guess, I don't know who grabbed me and grabbed her. They put us out at the same time.
Okay. So you guys ended up outside the club?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Once you were outside the club, who else did you recognize was out there with you?
Ebony.
Okay. Was Maisha out there?
Yes.
Was Laquan out there?
Yes, ma'am.
Was Mr. Smith out there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you ever see Mr. King that night?
No, ma'am.
Okay. What happened once you guys, that group was all outside?
It was an argument.
Between who?
Me and Maisha and Quan.
Okay. Is it fair to say the fight kind of started up again?
Yes.
And was it just between the three of you, or did anybody else join in on that?
Just the three of us.
Okay. Did that get broken up?
Yes.
How?
It was so many people, and I guess the bouncers.
Okay. So you were physically removed from each other?
Then
Is that a yes?
Ma'am.
Okay. What happened after that?
she was still trying to get to me after the bouncer had me.
Okay. When you say she, are you talking about
Maisha.
Maisha? Okay. What happened after that?
I really can't remember what happened right after that. I don't.
Did Nate show up at some point in time outside?
Yes.
Okay. What was going on the first time you remember seeing him outside the club?
I seen him. He said, if you're gonna shoot, nigga, shoot.
Who is he saying that to?
Quan.
Okay. So that was your brother Nathaniel saying that to Laquan.
Yes, ma'am.
And where were you positioned in front of the club to hear that?
I wasn't too far from him.
From who?
My brother or Quan. It was
Okay. Where were you in relation to the front door of the club?
Welcome back to the Long Crime Network, everybody. This is Jesse Weber. We are not able to show the witness that's taking the stand right now in the Lacquan Barrow, Garri King, or Michael Smith case. However, I can update you about what this witness is testifying to, and there have been some developments. As I said earlier, this witness has positively identified all three men as shooters in this case. And the latest developments that we've had, and you can go on our Twitter feed to see more about it, the Long Crime Twitter feed, to see updates about this case. The witness has said that a video of police body cam footage was just shown to the jury, and it shows the witness outside of the club telling police that the defendants had taken off. He then went down to the sheriff's office. He said that he was shown a picture of Mr. Barrow, and he said that he was the main reason for any of that happening that night. The witness has also said that Barrow fired, and boom, 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 it was very rapid. Smith started firing in front of me, and then King, again, identifying all three men as shooters. The witness was then shown photo arrays of all three defendants. He identified and circled all three as the shooters, and now he is under cross-examination. And one of the first questions that was posed to him under cross-examination is he was asked by Lacquan Barrow's attorney, Mr. Gorley, he asked the witness if he remembers telling police that he didn't see Mr. Barrow with a gun. The witness says he didn't see Barrow with a gun until he actually started shooting. It's going to be an interesting back and forth between the defense attorneys and this witness. I'm joined right now by Kendall Coffee, our prosecutor for the day. Kendall, big developments based upon this witness now has identified all three, including Mr. King, as a shooter. What do you think?
I think it sounds like the prosecution's star witness. It's why they saved him for the last day. And I think the cross-examinations are going to have to be star quality, given what this witness is apparently saying to this jury.
Yeah, we've just an update there is things are getting a little heated between the witness and Barrow's attorney. And by the way, I have to tell you, Mr. Gorley, he's got an interesting style. He's very, I kind of enjoy his style. He's no nonsense, goes right into the witness, talks about it, and he has a little bit of an attitude. I kind of like it. But the witness is reading his police statement right now. Barrow's attorney says it's much different from what he said today, and the witness says no, it's not. I kind of see this a lot. A lot of this back and forth between what was said in a police interview, what is being said now, and then witnesses actually saying, well, what I said is not different from what I'm saying now. And I mean, it's an interesting play that you have to make. There's only so much you can ask a witness, and then for the rest, don't you just have to let the jury be the decision makers about what common sense is?
Absolutely. You just put the statements out there. The inconsistencies may be obvious. And if the witness wants to say, oh yeah, they're exactly the same, then I think that just deepens the witness's credibility problems.
What other ways would you try to attack this witness? Obviously, we saw, and I want to actually get your perspective on this. When we saw the bouncer testify earlier, Wayne Counsel, his prior record was brought into question. It became a little bit of a testy exchange about how many crimes of dishonesty was he actually convicted of. How important is that for a jury?
I don't think with that particular witness it was a great big deal. He was security. He was a bouncer. He was simply being asked about what he saw and what he heard, and he seemed to have a pretty good foundation of personal knowledge. I'm not sure if he came across as a guy who's a spin artist. He looked, and the way he answered the questions wasn't elaborate. It wasn't eloquent or passionate. It was just, sort of very direct, almost a monotone. But he looked and sounded like what he was, a bouncer who was there on the scene and saw a lot of things. I was even struck by the fact that even though he was a security guard, when he saw a gun that he says was in Barrow's hand, he took off. He ran behind a car. And in a funny way, that didn't make him look like any kind of a hero, but to me, it validated to some extent his credibility. I
was about to say that. It showed that his truthfulness in a way. He didn't pretend that he was a hero, didn't say he ran towards the gunfire. No, he took cover. At the end of the day, this is a security job. He took a security job to throw out drunk patrons. I don't think he anticipated gunfire outside of the club. Or if he did, he was honest about what he actually did do. So Kendall Coffee and I are actually talking a little bit about the developments in this case, what we saw earlier this morning. As I said, right now there is a witness on the stand who we are not allowed to show for security reasons. So I keep updating about what is happening. Again, we said that certain things have gotten a little heated between the defense attorney in this case, Michael Gorley, who does represent Mr. Barrow, and the witness right now on the stand. Kendall Coffee and I are going to keep talking about the latest developments of this case, but I do want to continue showing you the testimony of Danielle Kendrick, the victim in this case, and someone who was intimately involved in this altercation. She got into a fight with Maisha Barrow, Mr. Barrow's sister, and it all spun out of control. So she's a big factor in this case. And as we kept talking about all morning, the question of credibility. Do you believe this witness? Do you believe her testimony? Do you believe the testimony of her brother Nathaniel Kendrick, who's also a victim in this case? These are the questions that the jury is going to have to consider. So I do want to play for you now, again, the continuation of Danielle Kendrick's testimony. And don't go anywhere. We'll be back here with more live analysis, coverage, and updates in this trial.